We're going to try to do 5 and 6, or at least part of 6 tonight, and again have some lab time. I like to do some lab, or have set aside lab time every night, and I think that probably after 2.5, 3 hours you're sick of listening to me. So hopefully labs, and hopefully you are using the lab time. If it is more convenient for you to do the labs without being logged in, headset on, all that other good stuff, I don't really care as long as you're doing the labs. And again, it's easier to answer questions when you get on those cert tests. Things get confused if you just try to do question banks. If you have done something, it's a lot easier to put it in perspective, or to get it straight in your mind as to what happened. But tonight we're going to talk chapter 5. We're going to talk about wireless LANs, and then we're going to talk about WANs for a little bit, wide area networks. But wireless, something that we all use in one form or another: cell phone, a laptop from a wireless access point, or a wireless router, a tablet, lots of different ways to do that. So we're going to talk about the wireless technologies different from the wired equivalents. And when we talk about the media, and the atmosphere is the media, we frequently refer to these as a bounded network and an unbounded network. The bounded network is the wired network. We're not doing anything different with wireless than we're doing with wire, except where it goes. We're still putting intelligence, information, data on a signal. We had the carrier signal because we had the CSMA-CD carrier signal on the wired network, and we encoded it with the data that we have. In the wireless, we're going to have a radio signal, and we're going to encode the radio signal. So we're doing the same thing. It's just where it goes. The wireless goes everywhere as far as it will go, whatever range it goes to. And then we'll talk about some of the common Wi-Fi protocols. So we're going to talk about physical properties of radio broadcast, and about wireless network components. And these may be things you say, okay, I've been there, done that, and you may have, very likely have been there, done that, or thought about some of the physical properties of a radio broadcast over wireless, because it didn't work. It didn't work in this circumstance, and I had to move the wireless, or I had to move around with the device in order to make it work. Different things cause it to happen. You may have run one of the Wi-Fi scanners and found out that your neighbors are, there are hundreds, and if you live in an apartment building in particular, there are an awful lot of these things. If you're in a business area, there are a lot of these things, because it seems that every small business in the world has got one. ECPI, we walk out the front door and there were 12 right there in the area. And this was just small business. This wasn't even in a dense area. So you may have some of the physical properties of the broadcast and the wireless itself. How do I make my wireless as clear, as usable as possible with these things? And then the wireless network components. So the radio broadcast, and this shows they always say WAP, wireless access point. The difference between a wireless access point and a router is, a wireless router is, a wireless router has a WAN port. A wireless access point is simply a wireless switch, for lack of a better word. It connects the wireless devices to it, and then it's going to have a wired connection to the network to put the wireless devices on the wired network. And if you think about that from a security perspective, that may not be good, because we got, and you heard, and you've talked about, and you've had firewalls, so we don't go all this trouble to configure a firewall, and then we put a wireless access point in the middle of the network that somebody might be able to compromise, and they just go right around the firewall. So taking care of what goes on with these things is something that we need to do. So we have wireless local area networks, just like we had local area networks with the wireless. We're talking about the same thing. We're talking about broadcast domains, and that's what we're doing. The networks transmit the signals through the air via radio frequency waves. The problem with it is, where do they go? Depends on how powerful they are and what kind of antenna are we using in order to send our signals? We can have the omnidirectional, which is shown here, which radiates out from the center in all directions, or we can have directional antennas. I'm going to have some pictures of some of these things and the different names of them in a few minutes, but the directional antenna is more focused and generally are going to go a longer distance. I read an article, saw an article, I don't know, probably 6 years ago when I was doing a wireless class, about a guy, and this was in Colorado Springs, who decided that he wanted to be able to get to his wireless network from his favorite bar. So he set up a big antenna system, and he could get the signal on his device at his favorite bar, but he couldn't get back because you have to be able to go in both directions. So the antenna determines how focused it is, and the more focused the antenna, the longer the distance is going to be. They are flexible, but there is a significantly lower level of security. We looked at some of the things, talked about a few things, and there are other security measures that we can take on switches that we'll talk about next week. That, to get onto a switch, you got to plug into it. You've got to have physical access to it. To get onto a wireless access point, all you got to be able to do is receive the radio signal. And there are, we're going to hide the SSID. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. But people that know what they're doing, that just doesn't show to everybody. It's still going to be in the transmission because that's the only way it knows how to get to that particular access point. They're flexible. We had a situation one time that, Friday morning they said, okay, on Monday we need this new room set up. Was a new room, brand new desk, just got there, set up the desk. New computers just came in, 30 new computers. We need this room set up Monday morning. Want a piece of wire in the room. So what we did, flexible but less secure, we ran a wire from the NOC to the room, put in a wireless access point, and only used the switch portion. We didn't route with it. Turned off the DHCP server on the router so that the devices in the room connect to what is now a wireless access point because we're not using the routing capability of it, and get a DHCP address, an IP address on the network. We had it set up, 2 hours instead of 8 days or all weekend trying to run wire. Because when you do that, put a switch in, you got to run the wire to each of the stations to go back to the switch. So it is very flexible. They are not as secure. And we've got the several layers of security that we can put onto it. We can put none, where anybody can connect to it. Open wireless, you've seen those. And you got to ask yourself about the open wireless. Why is it open? Do you really want to use it? And I guess it's okay as long as you go to HTTPS to secure websites, as long as you encrypt your data that goes across it. Because if you don't, then somebody can sit there with a man-in-the-middle attack and watch everything that goes across that wireless access point. The other one, the old one, WEP, Wired Equivalent Protocol, which has been proven to be not really very effective. There are a number of softwares that you can use, and you can break WEP in probably about 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the outside, depending on how much traffic is on the access point or on the wireless router. WPA and WPA2 are the ones that we should be using. WPA2 is actually the final solution right now for security. WPA was an interim solution to make WEP stronger, basically. WPA2 is the one that we preferred. We can have either the pre-shared key, which we use at home, or we can have enterprise security. In enterprise security, we use a central authentication server in order to get to allow users onto our network. So a little diversion there for the security because I don't recall it in these slides, and it's something that we need to stick in there. Yeah, we need that. We need to control who gets on it. And if you have open access points, just be careful about using those. Wired and wireless signal share similarities. We have a carrier. We have a multiple access. A wireless access point, it really is a bus. Everybody's connected to the same media because it's the same radio signal. But instead of having the CSMA CD, where collision detection, we have the collision avoidance. We looked at that, and I've got a picture of the request to send and clear to send sort of thing. We have to get permission in order to use the access point, to use the signal on it. The same layer 3 and higher protocols. When we get out of layer 2, the data link layer, everything above that, whether it's a WAN, a LAN, a wireless, a wired, or whatever we're using, they're the same protocols. IP is IP is IP. Yeah, we have private IPs and public IPs. Routable on the internet, not routable on the internet, but they're still IP addresses. And we have TCP and UDP. Well, it's TCP and UDP. It's not a LAN TCP. It's not a WAN TCP. It's TCP. At layer 2, we have the protocols that determine, or we use the protocols consistent with whatever we're doing. If we have a WAN, a wide area network, protocol might be PPP, point-to-point protocol, might be one HDLCs, a Cisco one, whatever we're using at layer 2 is going to dictate wired, wireless, LAN, WAN, MAN, those sorts of arrangements. And wireless PAN, the wireless personal area network. Yeah, well, yeah, different layer 2 there. Bluetooth is what we're going to have there for those. So the same layer 3 protocols are going to be used for all of these things. The atmosphere, and if you've ever had satellite television, you know that the atmosphere can really affect what goes on with these things. Thunderstorm, we used to have direct TV, satellite TV. Thunderstorm, it goes away. A heavy fog, a dense fog, and we used to get some really dense fogs. It would become inconsistent, sometimes go away. Snowstorm, definitely go away, and then you get snow on the antenna, and it stays there for a couple of days. Something gets in the way, a tree grows in the way. Those things are all going to stop your wireless from going from one to the other, or at least degrade the performance. Distance degrades the performance, and we'll have a couple of formulas for those as we go through this thing. But how far you are away from the access point affects what speed that you get on the wireless. The signals themselves are radiation pattern, and this looks like a bunch of stuff here, I guess, but what this is what goes on with we got the 5 gigahertz on the right there, the little cells of 2040 on around the 2020, 100, whatever the channels are, and that's what the numbers are, the channel that it's using, and the circles, and down at the bottom the 2.4 the 2.4 range, and we say 11, 1, and 6. There are only 3 clear channels, and we'll look at those in just a second. For the 2.4 802.11 system, the 5 gig has a lot more channels available to it. 2.4 goes a lot farther. 2.4 meg goes a lot farther than the 5 gig. The higher the frequency in radio signals, the more data you can put on it, because you have more changes. And we talked about the changes versus the data rate. The number of changes, how much data we can put on it, is affected by the frequency. But the higher the frequency, the shorter the range when we do those things. And it's a relative strength over 3-dimensional, the inverse square law. The strength is the inverse of the square of the distance. In other words, if you double the distance, if the distance is 2, 1 over 2 squared, you're going to have 25% of the signal strength. So it goes down pretty quickly. The farther from the source, the slower it's going to be. And if you've ever stayed in a hotel and you're very far from their access point, you see that that's the case. They don't have, at least they didn't have, the one that I remember in particular, some of the newer ones, I think it was a 10 or a 54 meg connection, and I was far enough away, I was getting like 1, and that's really, really frustrating when you're trying to look at anything. Barriers to the signal. Lots of things can stop the signal. Walls are going to degrade it, and when you set up a wireless network, you've got to be aware of what the walls are made out of. We had one that went to part of the building that was a physical firewall. It was a cement wall with rebar in it. Now, the wireless signal wouldn't go through that thing. We had to set up an access point that would go through the opening that went into that area. So what does that? Mirrors. Glass can affect what goes on. Water really affects these signals. Rain, fog, those types of things. And another thing that might affect it, and this was a troubleshooting problem in the wireless course, is you just set up the auditorium where you're going to have, I don't know, 1,500 people come in for a convention, and your wireless works great. But all of those users get in there and your signal's awful. Why is that? Well, the human body is what, like 80%, 90% water, so we have those things. And then interference with each other, particularly the 2.4 range, because in spite of the fact that there are 14 channels, 13 in the US, you can use or only have 3 clear channels. Then you get somebody like one of my neighbors, 1, 6, and 11 are those. One of my neighbors on 3, so he's interfering with both 1 and 6. And I've got, I think, here in just a couple of minutes, we'll look at the ranges. And the reason is because the frequency separation based upon and compared to the bandwidth, they overlap each other. You don't have such a big problem with the 5 gig because a whole lot more channels are available with it, a whole lot more usable channels. But when you set these things up, you need to alternate the channels so that you don't overlap them if you have multiple access points. The transceivers, transmitter receiver, just like a NIC, except these are going to be radio transceivers. They are, by default, I guess, are going to be half duplex. If we're using more than one channel, they can be full duplex. They can send on one channel and receive on the other channel. And that's going to change with the versions that we have. We're going to start out with the A's and the B's, which are really old, obviously. And the first iterations of these things, and they were slow and not really all that great. Issues wireless signals in a single direction. Pointed at the receiver, and we need range in both directions. That's the Colorado Springs guy. He had range coming from his wireless router, because he could have a Yagi, a focused antenna, and he could amplify the signal and send it a long distance. But when you get to your laptop with your little bitty antenna that's on it, it's going to go the requisite, whatever it is, 100 meters maybe, in the clear. And the ranges that are established for these things are open. There's not in a closed room, not going through a floor, not going through insulation, not going through windows. And I just saw Noel's a metal roof. Absolutely. Metal roof. Metal's really going to affect these things when we do that. And just about anything that you can think of as a barrier. Windows with the new surfaces on them to keep the buildings cool are going to affect that. Sometimes we want to keep the signal in. You probably don't want the signal out in the parking lot. So you can use these things to your advantage too, as to where you place the access points, so that the signal goes where you want the signal to be. Issues, receives wireless, all the signals, including the interference, and there are a lot of things that can interfere with these. And another test back, and I don't know that I've ever seen it on a test, but you have a wireless access point in the lunchroom, but in the break room, but it goes down at every lunch for periods of time. What's the problem? Well, the problem with that is it's a microwave. Microwaves interfere with the 2.4 meg range. Wireless controllers are all in that range. There's a ton of devices that work at the ISM range. There's the industrial, scientific, and medical range is what they call it. The two ranges, the 2.4 meg and the 5 gig, are unregulated, which means that if somebody interferes with you, you can't complain because there's no regulation for these things. Equal strength, clarity in all directions is going to be an omnidirectional antenna, but the range is going to be less in those. And then reachable geographic area, why would we want to use those? We may want to use, like the DirecTV, the antennas that you see for the satellite sometimes, a focused antenna so that we can have a higher powered signal, maybe go from a building to building. Because when you start running in a metropolitan area and you want to have your own network, cities really kind of frown upon you stringing your own wire around the streets. So this was the what we would look at some of the antennas, and maybe that's not as focused over here. The directional antennas. Let me make it a little smaller. See if it's it's still not all that great, is it? But anyhow. Directional antennas, the Yagi, and this is a picture over in the right of Yagi. It looks like an old UHF TV antenna, honestly. We have the Yagi, we have the grid antenna here, with a pedestal and then a patch antenna. The rubber ducky down here at the bottom, it's been called the rubber duck. It's the little antennas that you used to see. Now the new ones, we don't really see the antennas on them. We don't know how many there are when we do those things. So the high power outdoor omnidirectional antenna in the middle here, and this was for an ad, obviously, a 3-foot jumper. We have a directional antenna going from the buildings to the center that we can go from building to building. And my example was always, hey, you need to go across the Grand Canyon. What are you going to use? We're going to use a parabolic antenna to get there because it's going to be much more focused than anything else. The promised image of the different channels that are available for these things. So we do have the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 14. I think 14 is Japan, maybe. We don't use that. We use 1 through 13. But we have a 5 megahertz separation between these things, but we have a 22 megahertz bandwidth. So channel 1 here, the frequency 2.412 is the center frequency of this thing. So it's going to go 11 in each direction. When we do that, we're going to overlap these others. We got 3 here, which goes this way, and we've got 4 here, which goes this way. So we're overlapping, we're interfering with these things. The next one's 6, the next clear channel is 6, so 1, 6, and 11 are the clear channels that we have because of the bandwidth that we use and the channel separation. The channel separation is pretty small. Somebody comes in against a neighbor that comes in on 3, well, he's really messing up everybody because he's interfering with channel 1, he's interfering with channel 6. Fortunately, he's far enough away that he doesn't really do a whole lot. He's a low power for this, but I can see that one. And that's one of the, can be one of the issues. Could be an issue for the people that are closer to him when they do that. We do have the narrow bandwidth with these things, but the newer ones allow channel bonding. And channel bonding says, hey, I can put 2 of these together. And the pictures up there at the top, we have the 1, 6, and 11, 20 megahertz, 22 megahertz, 20 megahertz for round numbers here. 802.11n and 802.11ac allow two of these channels to be bonded, give us a greater bandwidth. If they detect somebody else trying to use one of the channels, though, it'll break the bond and go back to the 20 megahertz channel. 802.11ac goes up because an 80 megahertz goes all the way up to 160 megahertz, which is going to take care of just about everything that's available in this area. So two adjacent 20 megahertz channels are bonded to make a 40, doubles the bandwidth. The other thing that we can use or do use with these things, we'll talk about, have some pictures here in a second, spread spectrum. The direct sequence spread spectrum was the way that the original 802.11b, the 10 megahertz, which actually the standard was 1 meg, used thing. And we had frequency hopping spread spectrum, and some of you guys were talking about being in the Army, and they used frequency hopping for communications for a while until everybody figured out how to follow the hopping, going from frequency to frequency. It changes frequencies really quickly. And then orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. And we said early on, a big part of networking is actually learning the language. What do all these words mean that we're doing things with? So spread spectrum, the direct sequence breaks it into what's called chips. These are signals that go around here, and the direct sequence is the bottom right here. It looks like noise. Looks like random noise, and the old Wi-Fi and the CDMA cell phones used direct sequence spread spectrum. What it does is spreads the data, the information, all over a lot of different frequencies. The chips, the individual small frequencies, each carries a little bit of data, so that if you have interference at one portion of the frequency, you don't lose everything. You don't lose the full connection. Frequency hopping switches frequencies around. If you have, again, interference, you lose a little bit of it. You don't lose everything. And then the orthogonal uses 52 subchannels and try to do an image over here, but subcarriers, different frequencies of these things. So it's kind of similar to the direct sequence, except it's clearer and it has a defined set of subchannels instead of the chips, and I've forgotten the number of chips that are in those things. The newer techniques. The older techniques are the ones up here at the top, the multipath with 802.11a, b, and g. We can have multiple paths, but we're only going to have one connection at a time. The newer devices, starting with 802.11n, are what I call MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. And you see the 802.11n access points have multiple antennas on them. We can have a connection with each of those antennas and be sending data with those antennas. Single user MIMO, the one at the bottom on the left, serves one device at a time, and then the multi-user MIMO serves multiple devices at a time. 802.11n and then 802.11ac. These newer standards, much faster, and then they go from acknowledging every packet to using basically windowing that we saw in the little demo with the sliding window. So the speeds have increased dramatically with these things. This one I left in, the wireless signals, the inverse square rule, and it says label it, and I did label it. 100 meters is going to be a 1, so when we double it to 200 meters, 1 over 2 squared, 1 over the square of the distance, it's going to be a quarter or 25%, and then we go to 400 meters, 4 times the distance, 1 over 16, 1/16 of the signal strength. So you can see it goes down pretty fast as you go away from the access points, away from the source of the wireless signal. The devices and I guess we've done with a lot of the technical kind of aspects. But these are nothing that are new to you. I put some pictures down here. The Bluetooth devices, and you can kind of see what they are. Healthcare, hands-free car kit, smartphone. You stream your favorite streaming music to your car system. I do Pandora. I'm a cheapskate. I do Pandora because it's free and can stream it to the car and listen to it, and don't have to pay for the satellite radio. In a hospital, there are lots of wireless devices that go on here. I have a neighbor who had a heart attack a couple of years ago, and they monitor him 24 hours a day. He got in trouble earlier this year. He went on a fishing trip and he was out of range of the wireless, and they didn't know they couldn't get a hold of him to find out what was going on. But those kinds of monitoring goes on with the wireless. I have sleep apnea, so I use a CPAP. They monitor it. They monitor me via a cell connection with those things. And over on the right, ubiquitous wireless devices. So we have those: tablets, phones, printers, game systems, media devices, the Internet of Things devices. Not necessarily using the protocols that we're familiar with. We're going to talk about some of the wireless protocols as we go through this thing, but some of them are a little different. But the number of wireless devices just keeps exploding. The connection point, we've talked about the difference between a wireless access point and a wireless router. This is a wireless router here, and a wireless access point would have these switch ports, but would not have this WAN port here. So our wireless devices would connect through the antennas, obviously, and then we would have a wired connection that goes back to the NOC that gets us to the rest of the network, of the wired network. So a wireless access point does access to the wired network. Wireless router, probably use at home. You may use the wired portion, you may use the wireless portion. I use both. The machine that I'm on right now has got a wire going to the router, to one of the switch ports. The phone, the tablet that I use, the TVs, they all go wireless. It becomes a protocol translator. The protocol translator is from wireless to wired, which is pretty sophisticated if you think about it. That this device, and they've gotten more expensive, I realize, this device that used to cost about $35 can do some pretty sophisticated things. It can route, it can put us on the internet. It can translate the wireless protocols to wired protocols and keep going with it. So it's a layer 2 translating bridge. We can also use wireless repeaters if we have a dead spots, and they've got this new commercial, AT&T I guess it is, where the family's throwing away all their wireless devices because they don't work, and the neighbor comes up and says, probably you're wireless. You got dead spots. You may have dead spots in your house. You may be far enough away. You may not be fortunate enough, and I'm not, that you can put the wireless in the center of the house. That is obviously the ideal location for it. So you may need, and I just recently put in a repeater in the basement because I couldn't get the 5 gig down there, but it works now. I can get the 5 gig in that area. 5 gig, going to be a little bit higher data rate, lower, shorter distance when we do that. Extends the range, repeat on different frequency, and it does reduce the bandwidth, but it increases the signal strength when we do those things. It repeats. It has to connect to. It has to log into your wireless access point, and it's talking to the wireless access point. And this is those. Yeah, we're going to use different channels to do these things. Obviously, otherwise we just be getting in the way of each other. A wireless bridge, and this shows the Linksys WAP54G. It has the ability to be configured as a bridge instead of a wireless access point. Now, a bridge is just, in this case, is going to go from one location to the other. It's going to bridge these two wired networks so that we can go, and this shows an internet connection going out here to the internet, the wired connection. What our objective with these wireless access points in bridge mode is to enable connectivity between the two networks in two different buildings in a street here. Maybe they're on the opposite side of the street sort of arrangement, and we want to do it that way instead of doing a VPN. We could do it as a VPN through the internet, but I mean there are multiple ways to do it, but in this case we're doing it with a wireless bridge to get from one to the other. The wireless topology is basically two: infrastructure mode, where we use a wireless access point, and ad hoc mode, where we connect one device to the other device. And if you think about it, ad hoc mode, Bluetooth connected to your phone, Bluetooth connected from my phone to my car. Those things are going to be ad hoc mode, device to device connection. Infrastructure mode, we're going through a router or an access point when we do those things. Scaling, it is more difficult to scale these things, to produce more, to have more. The simple fact of channel interference gets us. We did one, and when you do these things, you're going to do to find out what's going on, you're going to do a site survey. So the experts came in and put in a wireless in the building, and I think we had 4 wireless access points. So we took a class around to do a wireless survey, and what we found was it was actually something like this, except we went here, 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 and we went farther down. We had another one down here. So these things should be like 1, 6, 11, 11, not H, and then a 1 here. What they had done is we had like a 1, 1, 6, 11. So we had these 2 channel 1 guys here that were interfering or could interfere with each other. What can we do? And again, how far do we want our signal to go? A Faraday cage, F-A-R-A-D-A-Y, Faraday cage was basically chicken wire, can stop the signal from leaking out of the parking lot or leaking out on the sidewalk into the streets. You want to, as much as possible, keep the signal inside the building. And that goes back to the things we were talking about. What's going to stop the signal? Yeah, you have cement walls. Yeah, it's probably going to stop the signal. And the metal roof, yeah, should stop the signal. So how far do we want it to go? You probably don't want it to go into the parking lot, and you certainly wouldn't want it to go on the public sidewalk. There's a lot of that goes on. And a student that took a piece of monitoring software, drove down a street in Roanoke, and I think he found about 20 open wireless routers. Open meaning they didn't have any security on them at all. More stations, saturate the capacity. They do have limited capacity. They're not an unlimited capability for these things. Multiple access points, probably what we're going to use. We need to do the frequency separation. This is a wireless LAN controller. We'll do this. Actually, we'll do this, and then we've got the review questions, and we'll take a break. But a wireless LAN controller is an enterprise sort of device that we use the enterprise capable devices, and we will then control all of our wireless access points centrally. That way we'll have standard policies, standard configurations on those. The issue becomes, and the LWAPP there is a lightweight access point. What we have, sometimes called FAT access points, what you and I have, where we connect to our wireless router or our wireless access point using a web interface. When we upgrade to a lightweight access point, it has to be controlled through a wireless LAN controller. So we can control all of them at the same time through the LAN controller, but we have to have the devices that permit it. And the lower left down here, this thing down here is that we got the wireless LAN controller, and it's showing access to the lightweight access point. So it is managing all of these, and if we had 100 of them, it would be managing 100 of them. The other issue is roaming, going from one access point to the other. And the lightweight access points, the ones down there, the enterprise level ones, actually have a capability, a configuration that we configure them to roam so that they will automatically go from one access point to the other without dropping the connection. If we just have the access points, standard access points like the one on the right, if we go from one to the other, we have to re-establish the connection. Whereas if roaming is configured, one access point will pass the connection to the next one without ever breaking it. And where would you do that? Big warehouses that use wireless for the people that are putting things in or getting things out, sending information to the fork drivers in order to where to store the new material, where to get the stuff for a particular shipment. Those sorts of areas would have roaming enabled on the devices. So we are here got a few of the review questions, and then we'll take a break. So at 100 meters from a transmitter, your radio signal is only 25% as strong as what you would like. What's the furthest you can be while getting the signal strength you want? And this is an inverse square question. So at 100 meters, it's 25%. Which is going to be a quarter. So what's the square root of 1 over 4? Didn't know you had to do math here, did you? Did I put everybody to sleep? C at 50 meters. Let's go with that, because double the distance, 1 over 4, 25%. Going to be this one. Which modulation is used by newer, faster Wi-Fi standards? DOFDM, that's the orthogonal frequency. An office uses a Wi-Fi network for peer sharing between hosts with no centralized wireless access point. Unfortunately, its performance is rather slow. What kind of topology does it have? A device to device. No central device. No central device. Let's go with the ad hoc. The infrastructure is going to be the central device. The infrastructure, we actually create an infrastructure for these things. That is the infrastructure. You want to create a point-to-point wireless link between two buildings. Your goals are to keep a strong signal between the two transceivers without sending too much signal elsewhere. What kind of antenna should you use? Dipole, MIMO, monopole, or Yagi? And the Yagi is a focused one. It's not as good as the parabolic, obviously, but it is a directional antenna, and you can get long distances out of these, without all of the interferences, trees growing in the way, and cement walls and those sorts of things. Your office has a single wireless access point, but even with a strong antenna, it can't cover the whole office. Your boss wants you to compare options for expanding the network. What points might you include on your report? Wireless extender, low maintenance, might impact performance. Wireless extender would be high performance, but requires a controller using a lightweight access point or a cap WAP. A and C. Multiple thin WAPs would be low maintenance option, but might impact the network performance. So we'll go with the A and the C on that one. There are straightforward standards for centrally managing multiple access points on a WLAN, wireless LAN, but letting a device easily roam from one AP to another can be tricky. True or false? You get a true on that one, and yeah, unless you have configurable, and these are going to be the higher cost ones obviously, and you have to configure roaming on them. So we'll do this one after the break. Went over a little. Let's come back at 20 past the hour, and we'll do 802.11, the 802.11 protocol. Questions or comments? Always ask that just in case anybody has a question. Stephanie, all right. Yep. I see a Joe. I don't see a Joe. Got 3 missing. Joe. Bert, good. talk a little bit about the standards. 802.11 obviously is the wireless definition. The 802. 802.3 was Ethernet. 802.5 was token rings. 802.11 local area networks is a wireless standard. The 802 family, the progression that we've had, the common protocols, interoperability, peripheral standards, and configure and troubleshoot the wireless networks. So what we have is each letter, the A's, the B's, the G's, the N's, the AC's, is an amendment to the initial standard, the 802.11 standard. And a lot of similarities to Ethernet. We have the MAC address. We have, instead of CSMA CD, we have CSMA CA, and over on the right, the RTS is a request to send, and a CTS is a clear to send, and then it sends the data. Once it sends the data, we get the acknowledgement. So it is a collision avoidance system instead of a collision detection system. SSID, service set identifier, every service set, every device, and we can have multiple SSIDs on a lot of the wireless devices. The SSID is where we're going to connect. It basically is the name of the network that we're connecting to. Whatever you see when you connect to the wireless, that's the SSID. The industrial, scientific, medical band range, the frequencies, 2.4 gig. We have the 14 channels which we looked at. We have the overlap we looked at. Excuse me, 5 gigahertz, 23 non-overlapping channels, and that's why we could have them all stuck in there in that little octagon, in the octagon shaped arrangement within the devices. So 23 non-overlapping channels, shorter range. Higher the frequency, the shorter the range. The 2.4 gig is going to be a longer range, although not real long range, but a longer range than is the 5 gigahertz. Non-overlapping, shorter range, higher data rate. We're going to the 60 gigahertz millimeter wave, and I think that when we start talking about the version 5, the cellular, I guess an LTE is LTE, long-term evolution 5. They're talking about millimeter wave. It's going to be a really high data rate, but it's going to be really short distances with these things. Very high data rate, won't penetrate walls with the very high, the 60 gigahertz millimeter wave devices themselves. The layer 2 frame, we have the standard frame here, and you notice that it's very similar for the wireless, except that we have added a MAC address. We have the MAC address, the destination, just like we had the destination. MAC address, the source, just like we had the source, but now we have the MAC address to the router because we've got to send it to the router. And then we have a sequence control, the MAC address for the AP on these things, the data load. So where are we going to? We've added some MAC address. The data, the payload here is smaller, 1500 bytes up here, or is bigger actually, 2312 bytes, 1500 bytes. And then the CRC, we still have it in a 4 byte range. So we have a lot of the same similarities, kind of the same process, but we have, instead of going directly to a device, we've got to go through the access point. We have to find it first in order to get to the destination device. The standards themselves, we'll look at this. I've got a table at the end of maybe a little bit better progression, but 802.11a and 11a and 11b came about at about the same time. 11b1, and you look at this thing as a why? 54 megabits per second versus 11. Boy, that's a big difference with that. Almost 5 times as fast. Going to be a shorter distance, obviously, because it's a 5 gigahertz versus the 2.4 gigahertz. Lots of stories, and the story that I've heard the most is that right after they introduced the 802.11a, they couldn't get the silicone to make the chips. And by the time they got the silicone to make the chips, 802.11b was in use, and they're not compatible with each other. You look at one, the OFDM, orthogonal frequency for the 802.11a, and then direct sequence spread spectrum for the 802.11b. Then a little bit later, 802.11g, 54 meg at the 2.4 gigahertz. After that, 802.11n. 802.11n significantly increased the data rate, 600 megabits per second versus the 54. It says either you actually used both the 2.4 gig and the 5 gigahertz bandwidth. Use the orthogonal encoding for these things. 802.11 AC speeds up to 7 gig, and that's what this says when I show the chart. It's a little deceiving. 7 gig is the maximum theoretical for these things, and all of these, just like 802.11 and 802.11 AC, how many antennas do you have? How much data can we send depends on how many connections that we have going from one to the other. The advertised speed is theoretical, and they are going to vary. So the history of what goes on, 11A and 11B, 1999. G, 2003, and the frequencies and the bandwidth. So the bandwidth for each of these up through G is 20 megahertz. What we saw, the 1, 6, and 11, and their SISO, single input, single output. Antenna configuration 1. So we have one antenna, single user, one user at a time for these things. 802.11n in 2009 really made things a lot better. It used the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz range, maximum data transfer, and this is the data transfer, not the theoretical. The data transfer is 600 megabits per second. Channel width 20 and 40. We could bond two channels to get a 40 megahertz bandwidth with these things. If something tried to use one of the channels, it would unbond, but it would do that automatically. And it was up to 4 by 4 antennas, 4 inputs and 4 output, multiple input, multiple output, 4 receive, 4 transmit. So the ability to make these things faster is really we have here with the with the number of antennas. 802.11ac 2013, 5 gig, and the 802.11ac only uses the 5 gigahertz range. If you have an AC router, it probably will support 2.4, but it will support the 2.4 and the 802.11n standard to do these things. Most of them, the wireless routers, are going to be backward compatible in that they will have the ability to connect with the older standards. Keep in mind that if you connect with the older standard, you've just slowed your network down, because it's going to be the old device connects. It's going to be in a wait time for those things. So at 5 gigahertz band, the maximum data transfer 1.3 gig. It could have 20, 60, 80, and 160 megahertz, up to a 3 by 3 with the MIMO, multiple input, multiple output for these things. The 11AC Wave 2, 2015, 5 gig. We're up to almost 3.5 gig. That to me is really, really very fast for wireless. The MU, the SU is single user MIMO. I didn't say that for the AC. The Wave 2, multiple user, single user and multiple user MIMO. So we can not have just one user connecting to these things, multiple users. And the one at the bottom down there kind of gives you the MIMO, single user, single user, single user, AC, and then multi-user to go through. And the phi rate, the physical rate is going to be the theoretical. And the 802.11ac on the right, the wave 1, wave 2, and then the AC, they work through these things until they get to the final. Is the one that here has the theoretical 6.97 gigahertz, gigabit, excuse me, 7 gigabits per second, theoretically, to do these things. So, spatial streams, 3, 4, 3, 3 to 4, 8 spatial streams. A spatial stream is antennas. How many antenna connections do we have? But you notice here we go from the physical rate, almost 7, to the MAC throughput, assuming 65% MAC efficiency with the highest MCS. We're down to around 4.5 gigs. So still really fast, but the theoretical is probably not going to be achieved with these things. The old device, slow the network, or it may reduce security. We may have an older device that can't use WPA2. It only has WEP. Well, hopefully we're not going to do that. But if we had an 802.11b device and we put it on the 802.11 network, and you can configure them to do, N only, G and N, A, B, not A, but B, G and N, and we allow the B device to connect, we've just made our 802.11n router an 802.11b router. So it will slow things down. Not necessarily backward compatible. The protocols are not. The routers, the devices themselves usually will support the older devices if you want to use them. Or that's the range of standards that they do. Speeds, it will allow the speed supported by both of the standards. Encryption is supported by both 802.11ac. The protocol itself is only 5 gigahertz. Devices will normally support N in the 2.4 gigahertz. It will have that ability, but it won't be with the AC standard. In the MIMO, the multiple input, multiple output, to reach the maximum bandwidth, have multiple connections, multiple antennas for these things. Other wireless technologies, so we talk about them. RF, radio frequency, is just a generic term. RFID, passive tags, used for inventory, and these are the ones that are going to get you as you go out the store if you don't, if they don't disable it correctly. You walk through and all the noise goes on, and they say, "Oh, it's okay, go ahead, I know you paid." Infrared's still around, but it's not used, I don't think, very much. Well, it is used for things like TV controllers, but as far as the information data transfer, not used a whole lot because it's really slow. It's really more secure because you can put infrared NICs in a room and that signal is not going to leave the room because it is light. It's not going to go through a wall at all. IR, infrared DA, is directional receivers. Bluetooth, you're familiar with, used for the wireless personal area network. Wireless connectivity, up to 8 devices for Bluetooth. NFC, near field communications, 20 centimeters. Not a great distance, and that's the one on your phone. You can activate NFC, near field communication, and it's one that you can use to transfer information from phone to phone. But typically, I think the predominant use for it is for contactless payment, where you wave your phone over the payment station and get the payment through your phone. Yeah, we'll get there. Ant Plus fitness trackers use this protocol. When you connect your fitness tracker to your phone, your step counter to your phone to keep track of, and then it goes onto the website to have your history. Ant Plus, probably the protocol that's going to be used there. It belongs to Garmin, but they've licensed it to other users. And then Z-Wave down here, home automation. There are others that are used, and I think that Ant Plus is used for some home automation. And when you look at those, this is one of those, you can't just go out and buy anything for the home automation that's going to automatically work. You're going to have to buy things that work with that standard. Bluetooth, the class determines the transceiver's power. Power obviously is range based on what we've talked about. Most of the devices are class 2, operate up to 10 meters, 33-foot range. Those things, and it's like all other wirelesses, it depends on what the atmosphere is like. I used to use a Bluetooth headset to record lectures, and I decided one time to see how far it really would if it really was 33 feet, depending on the environment, obviously. And I walked around, I was much farther than 33 feet away from the receiver, and it was still connected. It got real noisy, but it was still connected. The high power class 1 transceivers, a longer range, but they're going to be on industrial equipment. The low power, 1 meter range, and they says these are not very common, but the 33-foot range, the 10-meter range is pretty much the standard, I think, that you're going to hear about these things. The versions, and the current is 4.0, and I didn't look up the 4 and 4.1 to see if it really is still the current standard. Data rate 25 megabits per second. Older devices, Bluetooth 2 megabits per second. It's not going to be a high speed thing, but it's something that, you know, we're probably not going to go looking up web pages with it or watching videos with it. We talked about connectivity. The one on the right there, the Wi-Fi channel, is using a Wi-Fi analyzer. This is something that you might see. What goes on? What's going on with these things? And this is obviously in an area that has a subway, because it says subway for the SSID, and then the Time Warner Cable pass point up there, and there we have the two here are on the same channel, and they're going to be interfering with each other because there are two strong signals on this channel. Subway here is on channel 1. Looks like the Netgear is probably on channel 6. And then we have a bunch of stuff over here on channel 12 that may or may not, depending on the signal strength, may or may not be interfering with each other. The Netgear here is overlapping. A number of these things are overlapping. So you see something like this, and that this is why in your building and in your wireless in the enterprise, you've got to kind of take control of it. You're going to have more than one. You need to set these things up so that they're not interfering with each other. So wireless itself, convenient. We talked about that. We have hotspots. Wireless hotspots that may be open. Do you want to use the open? It's up to you. You go into a Starbucks or a McDonald's or whatever, they're going to have a hotspot. Most fast food, coffee shops, those types of places are going to have hotspots now. Even the VA have hotspots now. They didn't used to, but they do now. The reputation of wireless is it's hard to connect, slow and unreliable, and it did used to be very hard to connect. Not really the case anymore. You just put in and the new ones, you agree to the acceptable user policies through a website, and you're automatically on the network. They're not slow like they used to be or unreliable like they used to be. Pretty high speed as long as we're close enough to the access point or to the router. They can have more complex security settings, and we have to worry about the channel overlap, the environment that we're in. What's between me and the signal? Can I get there? How much attenuation am I going to have for it? We got to have a strong enough signal to read it, And the signal to noise ratio. There are lots of things that can do noise. Fluorescent lights are one of the things that can happen. I had a guy one time said, hey, my wireless isn't working very well. And we talked about all the things. He said, oh yeah, it's sitting on the top of the refrigerator right under a fluorescent light. So the refrigerator, the compressor motor is going to give it some EMI, the fluorescent lights, because they actually turn on and off very rapidly, are going cause all those, have all issues with all of that. Factors, things that we've talked about, broadcast power. How much power are we using with these things? The antenna placement, the type of antenna. Is it an omnidirectional antenna or is it a directional antenna? And the antenna gain here, without getting into antenna theory, you actually can get some amplification from the type of antenna that you're using. The MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. How many antennas do we have? Attenuation, walls, coated glass affect things. Reflection and refraction. You have a mirror around. Refraction, anytime an electromagnetic signal goes from one medium to another medium, it's going to be bent. And put the pencil in the piece of water and it looks like the pencil's broken in half. Those sorts of things. That happens with our signals as they go through from one medium to the other. Electrical, magnetic equipment. Electrical equipment, noisy, put noise on the system. And then other wireless networks, like we saw in the image earlier, the numbers that are around that are on the same frequency, the strong one that's on the same frequency as we are. We've got to do those things, find a frequency that is best for us. It may not be ideal, but it hopefully is a situation that you're not on the same channel as the next strongest one. You want to be on the channel with all of the weaker signals if you can't be on one by yourself. Automatically configure the data rate based upon the signal strength. How far away are we? We've talked a couple of times about the inverse inverse square rule for these things. The SSID is basically the name. The clients and the client here is the devices. Memorize multiple networks, and once you log in, you can configure them to automatically join the networks. If the SSID isn't broadcast, if it's not broadcast so that it can be seen, you have to manually enter it. And some people turn off the SSID broadcast. That's great. And it's going to keep standard, ordinary people like us from getting onto the network, from seeing the network. But if it's a dedicated hacker, that information still shows up in the announcements for the wirelesses. So they're going to be there. It's helpful to do that, but somebody that really wants into the network is still going to be able to find those things. And you obviously, if you type it in, it's got to be there somewhere, otherwise it couldn't connect. And the SSID is the identification of what we're going to connect to. SSID is self-explanatory. In the network, in the enterprise, like the admin network. Payroll, I don't know if it's a great idea to advertise a payroll network because everybody's going to be trying to get onto it. So that users know which ones to connect to you. You go to the I go to the VA and it's in whatever the hospital's name is, guest network, and you can do that on many of the new access points. Is to activate a guest network on your wireless router so that you can put users on it. They only have access to the internet. They don't have access to your internal network in your house. SSIDs unique. In the large networks can be created by identically configuring access points using the same SSID. And in the roaming, we would do that. And if we wanted to, we had a network that had multiple access points on it, then we would use the same name for those. A rogue access point may have SSIDs that look innocuous or mimic legitimate networks. Wireless has this nasty little habit of connecting to whichever network has the strongest signal. So if somebody puts in a rogue, an unauthorized access point that has the same name as one of your legitimate SSIDs, your users may inadvertently connect to it. You need to occasionally do a look around with a survey sort of mentality. What access points? What are the names? Is there something there that shouldn't be there? I used to get busted for that all the time teaching wireless courses. Somebody would say, "Oh, we got an unauthorized access point," and say, "Yeah, and it's the course that we're doing." But at least that meant that people were paying attention to what was going on. So, rogue APs may be there, users, individuals, and a lot of people that have come through some of these courses say that bosses are kind of bad about that they will plug in, bring an access point and plug it into the wired connection in their office and then try to connect multiple devices to it, but just because they don't want to use what's there. So this is an exercise, and I put the link is in the book, but if you want to play with an access point, and this is I was going to try to show you what it is without messing yours up, where you can go and do configurations of it. They are there, and this is links this by Cisco. You can go through and look at all of the configurations that are available on here. VPN pass-through enabled. The wireless access points sometimes break VPNs, and you have to do that. Application and gaming. This would be the port forwarding that we would allow to happen. The administration status. Just something to look at to see what configurations are possible with these things, without going through and maybe making a mistake and saying, okay, I want to change mine at home. So we have these last few review questions. How does the 5 gigahertz band, and I said megahertz early on, the megs and the gigs got mixed up in my head, but it is 2.4 gig and not 2.4 meg, 2.4 gig and 5 gig. How does the 5 gigahertz band differ from the 2.4 gigahertz band? Choose all that apply. Fewer non-overlapping channels, less interference from non-Wi-Fi sources, longer range, more interference from non-Wi-Fi sources, more non-overlapping channels, and a shorter range. B, E, and F. So we got less interference from non-Wi-Fi sources because there are more devices that run at the 2.4 gig than there are at the 5 gig. The 5 gig is tended to not be as popular, even though it's got a much higher data rate. But again, it does have a substantially shorter range with it. What Wi-Fi standard can operate in either the 2.4 gig or 5 gigahertz band, or both? Which router type supports both frequencies? We got a D802.11n for this one. A is 5 gig, B and G are 2.4, and then AC is a 5 gig again. Which of the following statements are true about wireless signals? Choose all that apply. In general, denser materials attenuate Wi-Fi signals more severely. In general materials, transparent to visible light will also be transparent to Wi-Fi signals. Metal barriers tend to absorb signals or reflect Wi-Fi signals, the metal roof question. Microwave ovens can cause interference primarily on the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi band. And then small changes of transceiver position will only cause small changes in signal strength. We'll go with the A and the C here, several of those. You configured several independent access points on different channels with identical SSIDs and passwords. What happens when a mobile client tries to connect with saved credentials? Connects to the AP on the channel it was configured to use, connects to the AP with the strongest signal, generates an error, periodically switches or roams. Connects with the strongest signal. Wireless has that low habit. It will connect to the one with the strongest signal. You want to set up a wireless control of your household lighting thermostat security systems. What technology would you most likely use for home devices? We got D here, Z-Wave. You have a Bluetooth keyboard that can pair with a compatible phone or tablet by simply touching the two devices together. What technology does that feature likely use? You'll see here with a near field communication, and you guys probably use that. I think my phone's capable, but I have never set it up. You should now know, okay, we talked about wireless networks differ from their, should say, wired counterparts, including signaling, scalability, and components. And then we talked about the 802.11 Wi-Fi standards.